Hilchos Kilayim Perek Chamishi, the laws of the forbidden mixtures, chapter 5. Today we're going to move on to a slightly different topic within Kilayim. Till now we've been talking about what's called Kilei Zroyim, the mixtures of plants. Today we begin what's called Kilei HaKerem, the forbidden mixtures in the vineyard. Now the truth is, we already had a chapter about this in the Rambam's 5th book, Hilchot Ma'achalot Asurot, in the laws of forbidden foods. The Rambam spoke a little bit about the Kilei HaKerem, mixtures in the vineyards, because it's one of those few things where the Torah forbids having benefit from the mixture. Unlike, let's say, Kilei Zra'im, the mixtures that we learned at the beginning of these chapters, if you plant them, you can eat the mixture. When it comes to vineyard mixtures, you cannot. And now we're going to get the rules and the parameters that define what exactly is the mixture in the vineyard. It says that a person plants two types of grain or two types of vegetables together with a grape seed. It has to be two types of grain with the grape seed, so three seeds together. He gets two sets of lashes. One for the first verse over here, you shall not plant your field with forbidden mixtures. And the second one is over here, forgot to make the words red, you shall not plant your vineyard with forbidden mixtures. Two separate things. When you plant, let's say, wheat, barley, and a grape seed together, you're transgressing planting wheat and barley together. You're also transgressing planting grape seeds with other grains. A person only gets lashes for planting forbidden mixtures in a vineyard till, first of all, he does the planting in Israel. It's not forbidden biblically in the diaspora outside of Israel. And also it has to be chita, usa'ira, v'chartzan, b'mapayles yad. A wheat kernel, a barley kernel, and a grape seed together in one handful. That's the biblical scenario where you're liable to lashes. Not only if you plant them, as you have on the right, but even if you just cover. You had these seeds lying on the ground, and you just kind of moved some earth over them. That's also considered planting. Leika, you get lashes. Or if you didn't do two types of grains, you did two types of vegetables. You took a carrot seed and an onion seed and a grape seed. Or one vegetable seed, one grain seed, and a grape seed. As long as you did all three in one handful and you put them in the ground, you get lashes. Now says the Rambam Halacha Gimel, another limitation, another qualification for the biblical liability. You're only liable biblically ella al kanbus v'luf. Only if you use kanbus or luf. So there's pretty much a big debate about what these things are. I consulted with the art scroll in Masechet Kilayim, and they say the following. Kanbus is either hemp. This is the hemp plant, which you make material. This is hemp material. Or it's caraway. This is the caraway plant, and you have the caraway seeds over here. That's the kanbus. Luf is pretty also debated about what exactly it is. I don't know how to pronounce the Latin words that these things are, but I can read it to you here. Colocasia antiquorum. That's the left one. And the right one is Arum palestinium. That's a funny name for current events. But basically, they're these big leafy plants, and they actually grow these little vegetables at their roots.
Looks like the Torah.
At their roots. Yeah, the taro. Yeah, taro. Taro is another way of spelling it. Yes, that's true.
It's like a hairy potato, but they're not so small.
No, they're not small. They're not small. And this is Arum palestinum, has these little berries that grow on them also. Now, why are these,
Plants, you see similar plants like that around here. They like very...
The one on the right?
Temperate.
This one?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I see.
I mean, that leaf, it's usually more orange, but that one's kind of dark.
Okay, those are like the birds of paradise flowers.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a plant that actually has berries growing on it.
Iris.
Well, we're going to have iris later in today's chapter. This is, that's the Latin name. I don't know what they call it in English. The point is, these are the only ones which you'd be liable biblically for planting with the grapes. I know I said before carrots and onions. Maybe it's not biblical. Why? Because it has to be something where the plant will mature together with the grape seed. See, when you plant the mixture of the grain and the grape, or the vegetable and the grape, you have to know that what's going to grow from this mixture is going to grow together somewhat simultaneously. Grapevines take a long time to mature. These plants also take a long time to mature. If you were to plant, let's say, just a carrot or a potato, those can go pretty quick. And so they wouldn't finish with the grape seed, and therefore there wouldn't be biblical kilayim. All other plants are also forbidden, just not biblically, they're rabbinic. It's also forbidden rabbinically to plant these grape mixtures with grains and vegetables also outside of Israel. How come this one's different? How come the sages forbade us to plant vineyard mixtures outside of Israel, but they didn't forbid the planting of, let's say, fruit mixtures or other grain and plant mixtures? Huh? How come? Says the Rambam, the vineyard mixtures have a stringency that were they to be planted in Israel, they would become also forbidden to have benefit from it. Not just the planting is forbidden, the consumption is also forbidden. So everything goes down one level in the diaspora. If in Israel it's only forbidden to plant, so outside of Israel, permitted to plant. But if in Israel it's forbidden to have benefit, like in the vineyard mixtures, well then outside of Israel it's at least forbidden to plant. You cannot help a Gentile when it comes to the vineyard mixtures. You cannot help him hoe his land. But we could help him uproot these mixtures from his land.
What is a tifla?
Davar bilti ratzui. Something undesirable. Yeah, tifla, like tiflut. Halacha vav, ein asur mishum kilei hakerem, elamine tvua, umine yirakos bilvad. The only thing which has a prohibition to be mixed with grape seeds is grain, going back to this chart again. Because right, we divide all seeds into a couple of categories. Tvua is grain, kitnius is legumes, garden seeds. Then you have mine zroim, the seeds that are planted in bulk, and the mine yirakos, the seeds that are planted in small quantities. So the Rambam is saying the only thing which is forbidden to have planted with a grape seed is the tavua, the grain, wheat, barley, oats, spelt, rye, and types of vegetables. Aval, shar, mine zroim, but any other types of edible plants, mutar lezaram bakerem. It's actually permitted to plant them in a vineyard. Vein sarich loymar shari lanes. Needless to say, trees. You can plant no problem an orange tree next to a vineyard. Halacha zayin, not only is it forbidden to mix the grain seeds with the grape seeds, but asur lizroya yirakos tvua b'tzad hagfanim. It's forbidden to plant vegetable or grain next to a vineyard. So here we have a nice little picture that I got actually from another source. Here you have a vineyard, and here you planted grain right next to the vineyard. Forbidden. Oilita gefen b'tzad hayarakos tvua. It's also forbidden to plant the other way, to plant the vineyard next to the grain. In other words, whatever one came first, you can't plant the second one next to it. V'im asakain if you did so. Afal pisha ein eloika, even though you don't get lashes, hareze kidesh. Now we're getting to a new term, which we're going to use continually throughout this chapter and the next couple also as well. Kidesh means you've made it holy, but holy in a bad way. You've made it,
in a bad way?
yes, you've made it prohibited.
That's a new thing.
Yes. The Torah uses the word kiddush, which usually means holy in a good way, and with a negative connotation. V'nesru shneim bahana, this is the verse we'll go to in a second. Both of them become forbidden to have benefit from. Hayarak oya tvu oya gefanim, whether it's the vegetable or the grain, and the grapes. The surfin as shneim, you must burn them both. Shenemar, because it says, here's the verse, right? Don't plant your vineyard. Pentikdash hamaleya hazera. That may cause the produce, the planting which you planted, to become hallowed, holy. And the Talmud says the word tikdash, you divide it into two words. Tukad esh. It'll have to be burnt by fire. In other words, it'll become forbidden to have benefit from it. Everything becomes forbidden. Even the straw, the stubble of the wheat, or the wood of the vines. They become forbidden to have benefit from them, and you have to burn them. V'layasik b'hem taner v'kilayim. You cannot use them as fuel for an oven, for a range, for a stove. V'layivashal b'hem be'esh treifasam. Nor can you even cook a pot on top of the bonfire which you're making to burn these things. Totally forbidden to have benefit from. Halacha ches, echad haneteya ve'echad hamekayim. The prohibition of vineyard mixtures applies whether you plant them, in other words, you planted the vegetable next to the grape, or you maintain them. In other words, you walk into your field and you see this situation, and you don't do something about it. Kevan shara kilayim tzamchu bekarmai. V'hinicham, you observe a forbidden vineyard mixture growing in your vineyard, and you let them stay. Harei ze kiddush. You've made them holy, again in a bad way, they become forbidden. However, ve'ein adam mekadesh davar she'ein shaloi. You don't have the rights to forbid something which doesn't belong to you. Lefichach, therefore. Take a look at the small difference in this picture here. Right now you see how the vine is standing up straight. Watch what happens. Now, boom. The vine is draped over. You saw that? Here it's straight, draped over. So let's say the vineyard belongs to you and the grain belongs to somebody else, to your neighbor. So you take your vineyard, your vine, and you drape it over the grain of your friend. Kidesh gafnoi, v'lo niskat sha'atavua. You mess yourself up. Yeah, your vine becomes forbidden, but you can't make the grain forbidden. Or the opposite. Sikech gefen chaveirei al tavua aseh. Let's say the vine belonged to your friend and the grain was yours. And I don't know why you would do this, but you maybe wanted to give some shade to your grain, so you moved your friend's vineyard, your friend's vine, over your grain. Kidesh tavua v'lo kidesh gefen chaveirei. So you only prohibit your grain, you don't cause the vine to be prohibited. And certainly, sikech gefen chaveirei al tavuas chaveirei, you take your friend's vine and you drape it over your friend's grain, like kiddush echad mihan. Neither of them become prohibited. For the same reason, like kiddush. If somebody plants his vineyard with a forbidden mixture during Shemitah year, it doesn't become prohibited. Why? Because you don't own your field during Shemitah year. It's hefker, it's ownerless to Hashem. So you can't prohibit what doesn't belong to you. Halacha tes haraya kilayim bekerem chaveira ivikiman. If somebody observes a forbidden mixture in a friend's vineyard and he maintains them. Now, what does it mean he maintains them? You don't have a right to your friend's field. So the commentaries debate this. Some commentaries say it means that you're a worker. You're an employee by this guy and you see a forbidden mixture in his field. Others say that even if you're not an employee, you just have permission to be in the field. A third interpretation is no, even if you're a regular guy, if you pass by somebody's field and in your heart you don't feel the need to do something about it, at least to notify the owner, then there's a transgression which you have done. Whether it's the employee or the guy that has permission or the regular guy, according to which commentary you're going to choose to follow, the point is if you see a problematic mixture and you do nothing about it, you become forbidden to have benefit from them. Everybody else is permitted. If it would have been the owner himself who maintained them, he would forbid the grapes or the grain to everybody. But you, as an observer, at least you can prohibit it to yourself, even if not to everybody else, as we explained. Halacha yud ha'anas. Anas means like a terrorist, essentially. A guy who forces himself onto your field. Okay, today we have the whole squatter situation going on. Okay, you have a field. You have a vineyard. Ha'anas shazara kilayim bekerem chaveirei. Comes the terrorist and plants forbidden mixture into your vineyard. Im nishtaku habaylim. There's two interpretations of what these words mean. The Rambam himself writes in his commentary to the Mishnah that nishtaku habaylim means the owners hid.
The owners?
Hid. Hitchabu. They were afraid of this guy and they ran away. So let's translate it that way first. Im nishtaku habaylim. If the owners ran away in fear, afal pisha lo nisyashu, even if in their hearts they don't despair, they hope to reclaim their field. The fact that in their field there was prohibited mixtures planted makes the whole field prohibited, the whole vineyard prohibited. But if they did not go to hide away in fear, even if in their hearts they despaired of reclaiming the field, they only make it holy when it's prohibited rabbinically. That's one way to explain it. The other way to explain it, nishtako habaylim, means that the owner's name sunk. In In other words, people stopped to associate this field with the owner. The guy was a squatter for so long, people began to assume it's his field. That's a differentiating factor. Im nishtaku habaylim, if the owner's name sunk away, then it becomes the terrorists. And what he does has biblical effect. If the name didn't sink away, everyone still knows, everyone still associates, oh, that field used to belong to that guy, then the prohibition only happens rabbinically. Halacha Yud Aleph, Haruach she'akra peiris hagefen. So let's use this scenario here. Grapes are over here, grain is over there. Comes the wind, uproots some vines of a grape, v'shilcha oisan ala tvua, and drapes it over grain. You didn't do anything. The wind did it. Nevertheless, yigrar oisan miyad. You must remove them immediately. If something beyond your control happened and you couldn't remove them, then they're permitted, they haven't become prohibited. As we're going to see later in this chapter, a certain time frame cannot pass. There's a time frame which has to be met. If that time frame passes, then it will actually become prohibited. Halacha Yud Beis, Anos Shazara HaKerem. Going back to the terrorist, the forceful guy, he comes and plants your vineyard with forbidden mixtures. The moment the guy leaves, you must harvest that planting immediately. Even on Chol HaMoed, when we're not supposed to work, if we don't have to. You must cut this down to stop the prohibition. If you didn't find workers, you got to raise their salary. Tell them you'll pay them up to a third more of their usual salary. If the workers didn't want to work for that, they wanted even more than that, or you couldn't find any workers, well then, ask around pleasantly till you get somebody to cut it for you. It's not so urgent anymore. If the planted material stays in its planted state to the point that it will become forbidden, well then it's forbidden. And it's just too bad, everything becomes prohibited. When is that point? At what point in their growth can grain or vegetables become prohibited? The grain and the vegetables, once they take root, they become prohibited. The grapes need to reach the size of a small white bean. Remember, because it says, when the Torah describes the plantings that become forbidden, it says, the full seed which you planted and the grain of the vineyard. Which means this one needs to wait till it becomes planted. This one needs to wait till it becomes more of a grain. So the grains themselves, once they're planted and take root, become prohibited. The grapes need to start growing a little bit. But counterintuitively, if the grain grows fully, it's fully ripened, the grape is ripened fully, einon miskaches, they actually cannot become prohibited because they're already basically considered to be cut off of the ground. Keitzad, what does that mean? You have fully ripened grain, next to which you planted a vine. You have a grape that's fully ripe, and then you planted grains or vegetables next to it. Even though the act is forbidden, the grapes or the grains don't become prohibited. What if you have a vineyard whose grapes aren't even that mature? They aren't even the size of a white bean. They're still what you call boisers, like underdeveloped. Then you go and you plant a vegetable or a grain, and the vegetable and the grain take root. They haven't become prohibited because the grapes aren't big enough. Nevertheless, the rabbis fine you, penalize you, and they forbid the growth. But the grapes, the undeveloped grapes, are still permitted. If you manage to uproot the growing grain or vegetables before the grapes reach that mature size of being the size of the white bean, then it's even permitted to have benefit from it because there was no forbidden mixture at all. If part of the grapes reached that size, part of the grapes didn't reach that size, the ones that reach the size become prohibited, the ones that don't. Halacha tezvav anavim shenasu kapoil halavan. What if it's the opposite? Not where the grapes hadn't reached the size, but where the vegetables hadn't reached the size. So the grapes reached the size. They were the size of the white meat. And right next to it, you go and you plant a little bit of grain. So here's the vineyard on the side. Here's the grain in the middle. Or vegetables. And you manage to pick the grain before it takes root. It's permitted to have benefit from it. If they take root, that's it. They're forbidden. A vine whose leaves dried out. Here's the vine branch, right? All the leaves you can see dried. They fell off. But not they fell off because they're totally dry and like the plant is dead. The same way a vine would dry up during the winter time. It's going to reproduce later. Right now it's dry. It's still forbidden to plant vegetables or grain next to it. If you, right, that's the reason. That's the reason. Since right now it goes through the season, so it's fine. However, the imzara loy kiddush, because the grape isn't living fully, so if you planted next to it, at this point, you're not going to make it prohibited. Also, if you plant, where's my picture here? I don't see it. If you plant in a flower pot that doesn't have a hole, that's just sitting in the vineyard, so the flower pot isn't nurturing from the ground, loy kiddush. We can't make it prohibited because it's not getting from the same place. The rabbis will give you rabbinic lashes. But a flower pot with a hole, that's like the ground. If there's a hole going through to the ground, it's like planting in the ground. Yud Zayin. What if you didn't plant it intentionally? You're walking through the vineyard, you're a farmer, you have some seeds in your pocket, some seeds fall out. Or there are some seeds with the fertilizer that you put into the field. Or you're watering the field, and there's seeds in the water. Or you were planting seeds in a grain field. You didn't mean for it to go into the vineyard. Or you were winnowing, right? This is winnowing. Zoyre. Here's the guy. In ancient times, how did they separate the chaff from the kernels? They used to pick it up to the wind. So you're doing this, you're minding your own business in a grain field. But because you lifted the kernels with the wind, so what did the wind do? The wind blew these kernels backwards, not forwards, we'll see for a minute forwards, backwards, and they fell into a vineyard. And they grew. Doesn't become prohibited. Why? What does it say in the verse? You have to plant them. You didn't plant them. He didn't plant them. Of course, when they start to grow, you got to uproot it. But we're not going to hold you accountable. Only if you actively maintain them and you want them there, then it becomes prohibited. If the wind, you're winnowing, back to this picture, you're winnowing, and the wind blows it forward, so you can see where the seeds fell. Then that's like planting. You don't grab the stuff away, you're going to be held accountable. What should you do? If the grasses begin to grow, just use the plow, turn them over, it's enough. If by the time you found them, they already became budding sprouts, destroy whatever sprouting buds began to grow, to destroy it, because it's all forbidden to have benefit from. If you only discovered the grain by the time it became a fully ripened stalk, if you got to burn them. And again, at any point, if you saw them and you maintained them actively in your heart, you must burn them together with the vines that are next to them, and we're going to soon define tomorrow, that is, how many vines become prohibited. A person is walking through his vineyard and he sees a type of herb or a grass that nobody would really plant here. That's not normal for humans to plant this in a vineyard. Even if you personally would like to keep it here for your animal food or for medicinal purposes, you don't prohibit the material unless what you choose to maintain is something which normal people would maintain in society in that place. What's an example of that? In Arabia, apparently, they like to have thorns grow in vineyards. Shereitzim bakaitzim ligmaleim. They wanted to keep the thorns for their camels. Harei ze kiddush. So, since you want it, maybe in America it's not normal to have thorns in your vineyards, but over there they want it for their camels. The camels ate these thorns. So then it's fine. Then it's not fine. Then it's bad. Then you prohibit the mixture because you wanted to have kilayim in your vineyard. Halacha yutes ha'erus. Erus. This is the iris. That's how most people understand erus. This is iris. Yeah. This is mint. The Rambam writes in his commentary to the Mishnah that erus is mint. Others say erus actually means what's called hedge mustard. Not related to mustard. It's called hedge mustard. This is three opinions on erus. Then you have the hakisus. Kisus is either ivy, this one here, or the Rambam himself seems to write elsewhere that it's called field bindweed. Don't know, but that's this type of flower over here. V'shoishanas hamelech. Literally, it means the rose of the king. But the accepted consensus is that either it's referring to the white lily or the anemone. It looks like a poppy. But it's actually anemone. Shanas hamelech. So the Rambam says these three categories of plants, ushar mine zroyim, and other types of plants, einon kilayim bakarim. If you plant this in a vineyard, not a forbidden mixture. Hakanbois, again the hemp plant, the hakinros. Kinros, you'd be surprised. The Rambam himself writes it's artichoke. That's kinros. The tzemer gefen, cotton. These plants, they're considered vegetative, and if you plant them in a vineyard, they forbid the mixture. They forbid the vines forbid them. All other types of vegetation, greens, that grow wild in the field, they forbid the vineyard. The Egyptian bean is considered a type of plant, and it does not forbid the vineyard. Hakonim are reeds. Some say it actually refers to bamboo. The havered and the rose bush. The atodin, according to many, is a thorn bush. According to others, it's actually a myrtle branch, type of hadas. Mine ilonhein, the enon kilayim bakerem. They're considered trees, and they aren't at all problematic in the vineyard. Halacha chav zeh haklal. This is the rule. Kol hamoitzi olin meikare. Any plant which produces leaves from its root, harei ze yarak, it's a vegetable. The chol she'enei moitzi olin. If it doesn't produce leaves, harei ze ilon, it's a tree. The hatzlaf, the caper bush. This is a caper berry bush. Ilon l'chol davar is considered a tree for all matters. Chav Aleph, Haraya Yarak Bakerem. A person sees a forbidden mixture. He sees a vegetable growing in his vineyard. The Amar, and he says, Kashe agia le'alaktanu. I see it, not urgent. When I get there, I'll pick it out. Mutter, that's permitted. He gialoi. But if he reached it, the Avar me'alav the Amar, and he passes it, and he says, Kashe echazer le'alaktanu. When I come back, I'll pick it. Now, we have a very interesting time frame. If he waited the time it takes for the plant to increase by 1/200th of its size, you have made it forbidden. Now, what does that mean? It's increasing by a 200th of its size. The Rambam says, how do we decide what's considered a 200th? So a very interesting way of calculating. Royan, we see. Let's say you would cut this vegetable or this grain from the ground. Let's say you harvested this wheat, you harvested this vegetable. Bekamazman yivash. How much time will it take for it to completely dry out? You left it out in the open to the elements. How long would it take to dry out completely? Haga ba'atzmacha sheyivash. Let's consider a case. For example, let's say this grain or this vegetable would dry out till no more moisture is left. It'll take 100 hours. Let's say. Yeah. You left it alone in 100 hours, no slicing, no. It's going to go dry in 100 hours. So if you were to leave it in the ground for half an hour is 1/200th of the time that it takes to dry out. That's also considered growing 1/200th of its size. Or ve'aser. So it's increased by 1/200th of its size, and it's forbidden. In this case, if it would wait less than half an hour, it would be permitted. In other words, the way we define a 200th of its growth is by a 200th of the time it would take to dry out. As the commentators explained, in totality, the time it takes to grow mirrors the time it takes to dry out. Of course, in individual stages, it's different. But as a whole, they mirror each other, and therefore, you calculate how much time it takes to dry out, and based on that, how much time it takes to grow. Chav Gimel, Asr Laver, Ba'atzitz Nakov, Shazarua, Bayarak, Masech So stringent are the laws of Kilayim that if you have a flower pot with a hole and it has a vegetable in it, you can't even walk through a vineyard. And if you left it under a vine, and it waited on the ground the time it takes to add 1/200th of its size, you have prohibited it. Final halacha Chav Daled, Batzal Shanate Bekerem. You have an onion growing in the vineyard. Here's the vines, here are the onion plants in the middle. Then the vineyard was uprooted. Gone, goodbye. And then the onions began to sprout. So this picture is a little bit inaccurate. Okay, you have the plant, you have the onion bulb under the ground. You put it into the ground. You don't see anything yet. The vineyard is destroyed. Then the onions grow. Even though the growths are 200 times the original seed, and here we're not referring, it's very important not to get confused, we're not referring to the 200 time frame of drying out. Now we're referring to the concept of what we learned in the laws of the forbidden foods, that like, let's say, milk and meat become canceled in 1/60th. Some foods become canceled in 1/200th. If you have 200 times the food, it's permitted. So here, you planted an original seed of onion in the ground. At that time, it was forbidden because it was a vineyard. Now the vineyard is gone. Now it grows the onions. The grown onions are definitely 200 times more the original bulb. Nevertheless, the core bulb remains forbidden. Because when you have growths that are permitted, the growths don't cancel the bulb. A mixture of growths, sure, but the growths versus the bulb, they don't permit the bulb, and therefore the bulb is prohibited.